Morning. Let you into a secret. I'm quite uncomfortable about this passage. And if I do my job properly this morning, by the end, you will also be uncomfortable about this passage. Also, I need to let you into another secret. I woke up this morning and I have a sort of frozen thing in my neck, and I can't really look that way. So you guys are going to feel really uncomfortable this morning, and you guys are going to be thinking, well, it's not so bad. But, okay. Well, this is a big passage, and we don't have all that much time, so let's really get straight into it. The passage seems to ramble on, almost as though it feels like Proverbs, where, if you've read in Proverbs, every verse is another thought, and it's so hard to try and grab a bigger picture out of it. But actually, this passage is really only about one thing. And if we can get the next slide. It's actually a passage of contrasts. It's a passage of choices. There are two treasures. There's light or dark. Two masters that we can serve. There is anxiety or trust. There are material possessions or the kingdom. And actually, as we dig a little bit deeper, we find that these are really all the same choice. Jesus is asking us to pick one. So, how do we break this down for our sermon this morning? I'm going to do 5 points, which is very unnerving because there should only be 3. But we're going to start in the middle by considering the two masters. We're going to think about money and the trouble with money. And we better do worry or not worry. We're going to seek the kingdom. And then finally, we're going to come back to the beginning to think about laying up treasure. Okay, so let's go to our first point. Two masters. We start in the middle in verse 24. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Well, you might say, I don't know, in today's gig economy, it's pretty usual to have work for more than one company or, have multiple side hustles going on. I mean, can we work for more than one master? But Jesus isn't talking about today. He's talking about his time. And he's not talking about employer and employee. He's really talking about master and slave. And it's very hard to be the slave of two masters. Because one tells you to do something, the other tells you to do something else. Which one are you supposed to serve? Which one are you supposed to obey? And so someone in that position, well, they're going to end up choosing one or the other. They're going to have a favorite. And Jesus says this is the same with God and with money. You cannot serve both. What does this mean? What does this actually mean for us? Does this mean we should all sell our possessions and become monks? Is that the only way that we can follow God? That we can serve him and not money? if not, then, and I don't think any of us in the room today have actually done that. So if not, then how should we handle money? How should we handle wealth? And what about our careers? Like, should we have a career? Should we have ambitions? Pensions? Financial planning? Estate planning? All these things that are part of our 21st century Canadian life. How do we reconcile serving God and not serving money? Well, let's think about money. We often, if you know the older translations, they use the term mammon, which is actually basically the untranslated word from the Greek that Jesus uses. And it means money. It could mean possessions. It's wealth. It's the pursuit of these things, as well as the things themselves. So why is money then set opposed to, in opposition to God in Jesus' sermon? We need to go back. To understand this, we need to go back, right back, to the beginning. Back in Genesis 1, we read this: God blessed them, that's people, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it." And God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. So if we want to understand money, we need to go right back to this verse. God's directive for people, for mankind, was to be fruitful, to increase, to fill the earth, and to subdue it. And many of the modern theologians see in this the idea of flourishing. Not dominion, as perhaps we used to think about it. You go out and you cut down all the trees and, you pull everything from the earth. But in terms of filling the earth and subduing it, it's a flourishing. A flourishing of mankind is what God calls. We, his image bearers, are to bring our creative gifts to building this world. To flourish numerically, to flourish spiritually, to flourish civilly, and to flourish economically. So money, in the beginning, money, what is money? It's simply transferable wealth. It is the thing that allows us to have economic flourish. It's the thing that drives the engine of the economy, that brings to us food, brings to us the benefits of a civilized life. But we find something else in Genesis as well. Genesis 2, God places Adam and Eve in the garden. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree of the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die." What is this tree? What is this tree that he puts in the garden? The garden that is very good. Why would he put a tree that is not good in the garden that is very good? Well, the tree itself was very good. But God places a choice before Adam. The choice is really, do you trust me to define what is good and what is evil? Or do you want to define it for yourselves? And we know that Adam and Eve chose, rather than to trust God, to define good and evil for themselves. And they fell, and they were cast out of the garden. And we have lived with that consequence ever since. And this is the problem with money. Money itself is good. Money is the way in which we build society, the way in which we enable so much. But the pursuit of money, is that choosing for ourselves. If you have money, what do you have? You have independence, you have control, you have security, you have comfort. You do not need to trust God. Jesus says we cannot serve two masters. We cannot serve God while wealth is our master. We cannot serve God while we pursue wealth as our goal, while its accumulation is our desire. The choice is really about our motivation. Whom shall we serve? And Paul warns us in 1 Timothy, but those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. Told you it'd make you uncomfortable. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. This is really strong stuff. And notice that Paul is talking about believers. He's not talking about the outside world, but he's saying that through its craving, some have wandered from the faith. So, to summarize what we've seen so far, wealth is a part of God's plan for human flourishing. But the desire for wealth is a corrupting force that leads us away from God and into evil. And hence, we cannot serve God and money. But now let's move on to worrying. When the sermon series was originally drawn up, this passage was broken in two. There was money, and then there was worry. And Sam asked me which one I'd like to do, and I went, well, I'll do worry because I don't really want to do money. And then I sat down and I read the passage, and the very first thing that you find is in verse 25, therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. Therefore, right? This is not the start of a new passage. This is a continuation. This is actually, Jesus is saying, from what has gone before, all this stuff about money, from what I've said about money, from what I've said about not serving God, you can't serve God and money, from that, I tell you, do not be anxious. And as soon as I read that, I started to worry. What was Sam going to say? He's preaching the week before, and he's going to, I don't know. How am I going to talk about worry in the context of money when, I don't know what Sam has said about money itself? Well, that problem was solved because Sam realized that he wanted to focus on International Sunday and the baptism last week, and he couldn't really do money. And he said to me, well, but I know you're concerned because your passage is really a continuation of my passage, so I don't want to simply put money, aside and come back to it later. What do you want to do? And I said, well, I'll take money because that will solve my worry problem. Right? Unfortunately, it just gave me a money problem, but, let's face it. We're, a confession time. I own my own home here in Vancouver. Instantly, that puts me in the top 1% of global wealth. I am in the 1%. Just by owning a home here in Vancouver. It's not difficult for us to be in the rich group, right? If we live here in Canada. And we cannot serve God and money. But I'm talking about worry. So, Jesus says, having talked about money, as you're thinking about money, therefore I say, don't worry about your life. So let's try and unpack this. Oh, that looks really small on my screen. Oh, it's not too bad there. This is the Greek that he uses that's translated as anxious or anxiety in all of this passage. 6 times he uses the same word. It's up there. It's weird. It's sort of merinao, or na'au, which apparently is how it's pronounced. But it has these sort of double duty meaning. It means to be anxious. It means often to be anxious to the point where it interferes with your normal life. It's the thing that's bugging you, that's really stopping you getting on and doing other things. It's that type of anxiety. But it also it has this idea of caring for something, seeking to promote one's interests or the interests of that thing, providing for it. It's sort of like this is something that may even be positive in some way, but it's something that it's a priority in your life. So Jesus is saying, don't let your material life be the priority. Don't let the pursuit of material things be the thing that consumes you. This passage on anxiety is quite long. We don't have much time, so I've pulled out 5 very brief points around that Jesus gives us about not worrying. His first argument is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Right? Isn't what you do, what you are, more than the material things that you need to do it? So then why worry about the material things? Isn't there more to life than this? Is his first argument. Secondly, he says, look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into the barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Now, there's a couple of things of principle to pick up on here, because the question sort of comes back, well, wait a minute, though. Like, what about the birds that die of hunger in the winter, right? Does God always feed the birds? And Jesus isn't really talking, he's not giving us a law, a rule here, but he's saying, generally speaking, right? Because people generally have food. The worry is not about where do I find food for most people most of the time. It's like, what can I eat? What is where can we do lunch? Right? What shall I wear? Not, do I have anything to wear? Well, actually, we all do that. We look in the wardrobe and we go, I haven't got anything to wear. Right? Full closet. Pick one. And the other thing is, think about the birds, right? He says they neither reap nor they sow. They don't gather, right? They don't gather into barns, and yet they're fed. Right? But the birds don't line up at lunchtime, for God to drop the seeds into their mouths, right? We know that it's only the early bird that manages to actually get the worm to eat for lunch. They work at it. They've got to go out and find their food. But the point that Jesus is making is the food is usually there. They don't need to spend vast amounts of effort planning their search for the worm. And we don't either. Okay, we've got to move on. He says in verse 26, are you not of more value than they? Because this is the other point we often get confused by. Jesus isn't saying God actually feeds the birds and he will actually feed you. What he's saying is, think about how the natural order works. Realize, it does work. And realize that in human society, it generally works. You generally have food on the table. You generally have clothes to wear. You have generally the necessities of life. And are you not of more value than the birds? So won't God be more interested in caring for you, ensuring that you have what you need? Okay, 27. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? Sometimes it's an inch to your height. The Greek is a bit ambiguous, apparently. But the point remains the same. Worry doesn't change anything, says Jesus. So why, as a Christian, would you be worrying about these things when it doesn't actually achieve anything? You're wasting so much precious energy, time, thought, sleep. From the lack of sleep, that is because you're worrying. Sorry. Why waste that, says Jesus, when you could be trusting God? But there's another point here as well. Another point. Just as by being anxious you can't change your height or how long you live, money does not really give us control over our lives. Insurance does not prevent the loss. No matter how wealthy we are, no matter how secure we feel, our lives still end. we do not really have control. It is an illusion. All right, and fifthly and finally in this section, therefore do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble. Slightly better in the King James, but I can't remember it offhand. Why Jesus sort of throws this one right in at the end, but we often worry about the future in a way that paralyzes us from acting in the present. But also, in one sense, Jesus says, there's plenty to worry about. You don't need to be worrying about tomorrow because there's lots to worry about today. Right? We're not guaranteed a trouble-free life when we trust God. The problems don't go away, but we need to lean upon Him. All right, well, there's plenty more that we could be talking about in terms of worry. But there is one last story that I want to bring from Luke, the story of Martha and Mary. In Luke we read, "But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him," that's Jesus, "and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken from her.'" That word anxious there in Luke is the same word as Jesus is using in our passage. And without unpacking that passage very, very much, Martha is seeking to bless Jesus. She's organizing a dinner party for him, right? But she has become caught up in all the practicalities that it means to organize a dinner party. And what does she say to Jesus? She says, "Lord, do you not care? Can't you see that I am busy trying to organize this dinner party for you? Don't you care that I'm working so hard at this? And Mary isn't doing anything?" You see, she was seeking to serve Jesus, but it became about her. Right? It's all too easy for us to allow our service for God to become our service. All right, let's get back to our passage. And let's turn back to this question of serving God or money, for we sort of need to start landing this. Jesus says, "For the Gentiles seek after all these things," that's what shall we eat, what shall we wear, what shall we drink, "and your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." So notice that Jesus says, seek. He says the Gentiles seek after all these things, the material wealth. He says, but you seek after the kingdom. This reinforces the point that he made earlier about serving God or money. It is about the motivation that we bring. Not the money, but our motivation. Do we seek material things, or do we seek God's kingdom? What is the driving force of our lives? Who is the master that we serve? But also, as we're here, notice that he says, seek first the kingdom. See, he doesn't prohibit us from needing material things. He doesn't prohibit us from having earthly ambitions. It's not intrinsically wrong to pursue a career, to acquire possessions, to save for retirement, to leave an inheritance. But these things must be subservient to our service to God and to his kingdom. And the kingdom of God and his righteousness is what we are to seek. And this put me in mind of the Lord's Prayer that we were thinking about a few weeks before. And if you look at the Lord's Prayer, you can actually divide it basically into parts. Well, in 3 parts. Come back to that in a moment. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Here we find seeking his kingdom, seeking the kingdom of God. And forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Here we find us seeking his righteousness in our lives. And then in the middle, give us this day our daily bread. Simply asking that we might have the necessities of life. This prayer as a pattern, indeed as a recitation, it's a long word, if when we recite this, we have the opportunity to recenter our lives and refocus our seeking upon the kingdom and his righteousness. Well, our time is nearly gone. Let us get back to the beginning of the passage. Let us return to Jesus' opening statement and think for just a few more minutes about our treasure. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, nor thieves, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I don't want to unpack these verses themselves, but rather I want to ask, how can we apply this treasure principle to our lives today? Now, when you go into the literature and you go into Christian history, there are so many views of how the Christians should handle wealth. We can see from one end of choosing a life of poverty, all the way to some really far-out ideas that God will bless us with material wealth and riches. Each person's situation is different, right? God calls us to the paths he has for us. So we shouldn't be looking to our neighbor and judging them in terms of how they handle their wealth. But we need to have an open and honest discussion with God about what he wants us to do with our lives and our wealth. However, I think there are some patterns that we can take or characterize our approach as Christians, regardless of our level of wealth or our what God is calling us to. And I think there are four. Well, I have thought of four. I'm sure there are others, but let's just go through them. Simplicity. Regardless of how much money we have, regardless of our level of wealth, as Christians seeking to follow God and to serve God rather than money, we will live below our means. Right? Our happiness is found in Jesus, not in our possessions. We do not need our possessions to validate our worth. Second, generosity. We know everything is from God. Our wealth is not ours. God gives us what he gives us, that it might be used where it is needed. We should steward. We should be wise stewards, but we should not hoard our resources, but be generous with them. That brings us to our third pattern, that of sacrifice. If we are trusting God to care for us, to provide for us, if we are seeking his kingdom and we are not serving money, then we will give not just from our abundance, but from our need. Like the widow with the last coins that she had to the offering. We will, if we are following this pattern, give for the kingdom at our own cost. And finally, abundant living. For we are to give our lives and not just our money. We're to give God our time, our energy, our emotional capital. That's why we shouldn't worry, because we burn so much of it, right, when we're worrying. But we give these things to God with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our strength. I want to finish this morning by allowing God to speak to us. Well, hopefully he's been speaking to us, but to speak to us through the lives of other Christians who have wrestled with this question of serving God or money. And I want to have 3 examples. I'm not going to comment on them. I'm going to be reading mainly from, I'm reading from various places, but I will leave time at the end of each example to allow the Spirit to speak to us. So the first we have is the earliest Christians, some of whom heard Jesus preach this sermon. That is the Sermon on the Mount, not mine. Sorry. From Acts we read, "Now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and soul. And no one said that any of the things that belonged to him were his own, but they had everything in common. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet. And it was distributed to each as any had need. And the second example is that of John Wesley, who was an 18th century preacher and theologian, evangelist, and the founder of the Methodist movement. He was often quoted as saying, "Gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can." And I read this from a biography of his life. In 1731, Wesley determined to maintain his standard of living at the same level and give away everything above and beyond that threshold. At that time, with earnings of £30 and living expenses of £28, he gave away £2. When his earnings increased to £60, he gave away 32. As they increased to £120, he continued to live on 28 and gave away £92. Wesley became known for his saying, "What should rise is not the Christian standard of living, but his standard of giving." He continued this practice his entire life. Even when his income reached £1,400, he lived on £30 and gave the rest away. Wesley was afraid of laying up treasures on earth, so the money went out in charity as quickly as it came in. He reports that he never had more than £100 at any one time. And then lastly, George Muller. And George Muller was a 19th century evangelist, a founding member of the Plymouth Brethren and the Open Brethren movement. And therefore, I was going to say our father, our great-great-great-great-great-great-father. But yes, our spiritual ancestor here at Granville Chapel. And he is quoted as saying, and you'll have to get your head around this one, "Money is really worth no more than it can be used to accomplish the Lord's work." Money is really worth no more than as it can be used to accomplish the Lord's work. Life is worth as much as it is spent for the Lord's service. But George Muller was also famous for his work with orphanages in Plymouth. And I'll read this from his biography. The work of Muller and his wife with orphans began in 1836 with the preparation of their own rented home for the accommodation of 30 girls. Soon after, 3 more houses were furnished, eventually increasing the capacity for children who could be cared for to 130. In 1845, Muller decided that a separate building designed to house 300 children was necessary, and in 1849, the new home opened. By the 26th of May, 1870, 1,722 children were being accommodated in 5 homes, although there was room for 2,050 children. Through all this, Muller never made requests for financial support, nor did he go into debt, even though the 5 homes cost more than £100,000 to build. I don't know what that is in today's money, but it's a lot. Many times he received unsolicited food donations only hours before they were needed to feed the children. Muller was in constant prayer that God touch the hearts of donors to make provisions for the orphans. For example, in one well-documented occasion, thanks was given for breakfast when all the children were sitting at the table, even though there was nothing to eat in the house. And as they finished praying, the baker knocked on the door with sufficient fresh bread to feed everyone. And the milkman gave them plenty of fresh milk because his cart had broken down in front of the orphanage.